subscribers and listeners from around the globe. It's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if I hold my July 4th sparkler like so, could I possibly... And if I write a letter to Tom Hiddleston, will he respond in kind and also send me a sexy Loki photo? And now, the podcast host who will always protect his dog from the patriotic sounds of Bang Boom Pow, Pete Dominic.
Well, hello and welcome to episode, 386 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Very happy to have you joining me today and every day that you can on this daily podcast. Awesome guests joining me today. Always great. When Barry Ritholtz stops by, we had a really fun, interesting conversation. And for the first time, I had Dr. Mia Bloom on. He's the co-author of a new book called Pastels and Pedophiles, and it's all about Pastels and Pedophiles Inside the Mind of QAnon. To experts of extreme radicalization take us down the QAnon rabbit hole, exposing how the conspiracy theory ensnared countless Americans and shows us the way back to sanity. So I talked with Dr. Mia Bloom about that new book and her work. And, of course, as always, I got a news segment coming your way, but I can't do this show at all without you. So if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription, please do. Welcome to new subscribers over the past week. Several new subscribers. Great to have you. Would love to hear from you, learn more about you if I haven't already. Always welcome to join us on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. where we meet virtually. Before I get to the news, I do have one interesting item to share with you. As you may or may not know, a couple weeks ago, I was getting attacked incessantly on Twitter and online on every social media platform by thousands and thousands of real people, not bots. You can usually tell the difference. All calling me a pedophile because I made a comment on Twitter that we should not sexualize children dancing. Basically, it started there. You've heard the story before. If you haven't, that's the basic start and finish of it. Well, I blocked and had a friend block many of those people. And it died down as smart people predicted they would, and along with it, my anxiety. But they still trickle in. I still get called a pedophile like once a day. And today, some guy said that my days are numbered, pedophile, and included a picture of a drawing of like a guy getting bludgeoned by a bat. So I DM'd him and said, You just threatened me. Like, and normally I had just been blocking these people, but for some reason I engaged this guy, this kid, 20-year-old kid, I found out. And then we went back and forth. He called me a pedophile a million different ways. Then I said, why don't you meet me right now on Zoom? And he did. And we talked. And then he said the same shit. It got ugly. He hung up, kept DMing me. At one point, I just said to him, would you be interested in having a thoughtful discussion without name-calling, without any threats, and in good faith? I won't argue with you. I just want to ask you some questions. I don't know any 20-year-old guys who have your opinions. He's like, okay. So we talked. And then we talked some more, all on Twitter. And I asked him a whole bunch of different political questions, but I finally asked this guy, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? What's the toughest tragedy you've ever dealt with? And he said, right now, my mom is terminally ill. And everything changed from that moment on. And then he apologized to me for saying all of those things, asked that I forgive him. Of course I did. We kept talking. And I'm planning on giving him another call. Maybe I'll tape it. He wants me to call him and tape a conversation. He wants to be on the podcast, which is, we'll see. I'll tape it, and if it's worth it, I'll share it with y'all. But the point of me sharing that argument is, I guess, just not giving up on people and knowing that people are more complex and deeper than just ugly comments on Twitter. That was my hope, and that was my belief, and that turned out to be the truth. And it was just wonderful. It was a wonderful conversation and moment to have him basically tell me that he feels horrible for what he said to me on Twitter. And I'm proud of myself for engaging him and building trust with him and not, returning, I think, the kind of anger and kind of hatred and threats that he was making towards me. So I'm really happy about that. That happened, and I wanted to tell you, and hopefully I'll get this young man on to talk about it and share it with you. All right, so that's a thing. How about that? Now I want to get to what's happening in the news, what happened yesterday, and more. It's time for the last 24. All right, folks, I didn't get a lot of great audio for today. I looked long and hard for a couple hours, but I just didn't see a lot of great audio out there. There was, obviously, as there always is, a lot of news, some interesting stories. In the sports world, there's a controversy about the U.S. women's soccer team, who I love. I've been a big fan of them since the 99ers. When they won the World Cup back then, I've always been a big soccer fan and player myself. And the women were facing the flag for the anthem, and some of them were facing a World War II veteran. It was like 100 years old who was there, and some of them were facing a flag. And some right-wing news site said that they were turned away from this World War II veteran. They turned their back on him. And like serious, influential, blue-check conservative on Twitter went crazy on the women's soccer team. And, of course, that wasn't at all what happened. It was a terrible accusation, of course. The women actually of the soccer team, not only did they not ignore him, they gave that man, they all shook his hand and signed a soccer ball for the 100-year-old veteran. It was crazy. That was one story. A woman from ESPN is another story. A well-known commentator, Rachel Nichols, got caught up in a controversy, a storm now over at ESPN about her comments about a black reporter, basically saying that she got the job, the promotion, to be the sideline reporter instead of her because she's black. I mean, I'm really minimizing it, but that was a big controversy as well that I'm not really going to get into, but just wanted to mention. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that happened, obviously, the last 24 that I want to share with you and talk about. But here, let's start with just some ridiculous audio. I love these guys who go and interview people at Trump rallies and Trump supporters, and this is terrifying and entertaining, and I want to share it with you because this is, well, probably a waste of your time, but I'm doing it anyway. Take a listen to this.
Trump Kennedy 2021. What does that shirt mean?
I think that JFK Jr. is still alive.
The guy who died in the plane crash in the late 90s? You think he's still alive?
I do.
And he's going to come back and be president with Trump this year?
I hope so.
But how would Trump become president this year? There would be a new election?
There's a lot of things I think have happened, and there's some things I think I know, and a lot of things I don't.
Okay. And one thing you do know is John F. Kennedy Jr. is still alive?
That's what I believe.
Okay. Do you want to bet? Do you want to bet on it? I'll bet $100 that JFK Jr. doesn't come back from the dead. To do it.
But I don't think he's dead.
Okay. I'll bet $100 that he's not alive.
But
you bet 100?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
Great.
Okay.
Sweet.
And that's the end of the clip. I mean, how do you make good on that bet? How do you know who wins the bet? It doesn't matter. I will say this: if you know anybody who believes that JFK Jr. is alive and is going to come back and run with Trump, I will pay good money to make a connection with that person and interview that person. Like I don't understand that. I don't understand how you can believe that. Not that that JFK Jr. is still alive. Now that seems totally reasonable. That JFK Jr. would be on the same ticket as Donald Trump. Now that seems unrealistic. That's where I draw the line right there. There's no way that JFK Jr. would be on a ticket with Donald Trump. They don't share the same politics. I think it's fair to say. All right, here's another quick clip from the Good Liars from this rally from this past weekend, I believe.
Who's going to be president at the end of this year?
This year, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. But how is that actually going to happen?
Beats the shit out of me. Yeah.
But you think it's going to happen?
I do think it's going to happen. Mike Lindell, if you've seen his interviews.
Who's Mike Lindell?
He's my pillow guy.
Oh, he's like the pillow salesman. He's like an infomercial pillow salesman guy. Yeah.
Right, but he's also done numerous documentaries.
But he's mostly known for selling pillows, right?
He is known for selling pillows, yes.
I love when that technique is taken, where you just ask the guy, or in this case, women, questions, and don't argue with them. Don't try to prove them wrong. Just let them say things into your microphone and camera. And just put it out there. That's what they're doing in these two clips, and I think it's actually effective. And I like it. I enjoy it. Hopefully you did as well. All right, let's get to some more serious stuff. Here is Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who has come out against the big lie and more. And for his efforts and honesty, he has been ridiculed and threatened by his fellow Republicans and conservatives. But he's on Anderson Cooper last night on the 360, keeping him honest. That's what Anderson Cooper does. He keeps him honest. Anyway, here's a little clip from Adam Kinzinger. I don't think this really needs to be set up. I just want to share it with you.
I think it's so important for us just to have conversation again. And it's going to take, my friends on the left being willing to reach out and not constantly pointing and saying, you didn't do enough then, you did. And restoring that conversation. It's why I started Country First, which is country1st.com, by the way, to just say, learn to talk to each other again, because we're not going to be able to yell our way out of this. And we need to take those that are lying to the American people, and we need to make sure they never win an election again.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And that's, I think, what I was trying to do with this young guy who I reached out to on Twitter. I didn't want to keep yelling at people. I did want to ask questions. And we did. I mean, we went from the guy accusing me of the worst thing in the world to him asking me for my forgiveness. That's good. I think that's what we want, right? So I like that clip from Adam Kinzinger, and we can all do better, I think. All right, and here is a Republican strategist, or former Republican strategist. I don't think he identifies as a Republican anymore. Matthew Dowd. He was on MSNBC's The Readout with Joy Reid, who asked him, well, I don't know what she asked him. I forget what the context of this clip was. I pulled it so long ago, but I do like what Matthew Dowd is saying in it. So sorry about that. Here it is.
Well, one of the expressions that I grew up with is what's the purpose of locks? Locks are to keep honest people honest, right? And guardrails in politics are to keep decent, good people in their heart aimed in the right direction. And when you lose the guardrails, and people have human nature, and I can castigate a lot of people for a lot of things, but our leaders are supposed to give guardrails to humanity and and stop it from its worst impulses. What you have now is a sprint downhill to the basis amount. And I actually think today is worse than Donald Trump in the 4 years he was in president. They've taken it to a whole nother level. It's like somebody was successful in a Section 8, and now they're going to act even crazier because they want their own Section 8. So every single step, even the people you and I thought would stand up to it, don't care. Don't care.
Yes, he also said that January 6th was worse than 9/11 because it continued to rip our country apart. I'm not sure about that. I don't know the context of that comment, but, I mean, over 3,000 people died on 9/11, so, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Anyway, got a clip for you from the White House press briefing today where Jen Psaki took questions from reporters, as she does almost every day, talking in this clip about how American public opinion is for raising taxes on the wealthy.
First, I would say that the American people are aligned with the president's view that corporations and the wealthiest Americans can afford to pay a little bit more in order to pay for critical investments in our nation's infrastructure, but also in initiatives and programs that will help make our country more competitive and bring more women back into the workforce. And that's what the president is proposing. I would also note that we've seen in terms of public reports that of the wealthiest companies out there, a number of them didn't pay any taxes at all. And that certainly is not something that is viable, nor does the president think that is fair, and that sends a clear message that our tax system is not set up in a fair and equitable way, and that's something he feels we should address regardless. So that's his view and his proposal. We'll have to see how successful these lobbyists are at moving the public opinion and approval rating down from what it is currently, which is the vast majority of the American people agree with the president.
And speaking of the president, here is President Biden today warning about the dangers of this new variant. And I'm not talking about Loki. Huh? Who's watching Loki on Disney Plus? Huh? No. I'm talking about the Delta variant.
Our fight against this virus is not over. Right now, as I speak to you, millions of Americans are still unvaccinated and unprotected. And because of that, their communities are at risk, their friends are at risk, the people that they care about are at risk. This is an even bigger concern because of the Delta variant. In today's briefing, we discussed how the Delta variant is already responsible for half of all cases in many parts of this country. It's more easily transmissible, potentially more dangerous.
Yeah, and now let's go to Mitch McConnell, who is consistently making sense about the importance and effectiveness of vaccines. I mean, this is a terrible guy who is insidious and wrong about everything and only cares about himself and his own power, but he did overcome polio because of the vaccine himself, and so here he is again touting the importance of the vaccines.
Result of an extraordinary pharmaceutical industry and $50 billion we put into something we called Operation Warp Speed, came up with not one, not two, but three highly effective vaccines in under a year. A modern medical miracle by any objective standard. That obviously is the only way to finally finish this thing off. And I might say that, again, getting back to a football analogy, we're in the red zone on vaccines, but we're not quite in the end zone yet. And I want to say again, there's no good reason not to get vaccinated.
All right, now here's the other Republican senator from Kentucky, the always awful Rand Paul, living up to his reputation here, arguing there's not so much hatred in America. What are you talking about? Listen to this nonsense.
The bottom line is, and there is some debate on this, but what I don't like seeing, and it bothers me from my perspective, and of course my perspective might not be everybody's perspective, but I don't think there's as much hatred out there as everybody says. Everybody hates each other. I just think there's so much good news and people who actually really don't consider the color of anybody's skin in our communities. I think it's a lot of that good, and it's like on TV, everything's about hate. Everybody hates each other. Sure, there are bad people. Sure, there's still racism in our country. But the thing is, there's also a lot of love in our country. There's a lot of people.
I love listening to white people talk about how much racism there is or isn't. It's like one of my favorite things to talk about and listen to is white people and like men talking about how much sexism there is or isn't. I'm always like, oh, yeah, that guy makes sense. It's great. I also watched, I don't know if you watched it, but this guy, this awful guy, I forget where it was. It was in New Jersey? I think it might have been in New Jersey, where this guy, awful white guy, called a black guy the N-word and monkey and like hundreds of times, and then like cops took him away, and then he didn't say it hundreds of times. I don't know why I said that, but several times. And then the cops took him away, and then like 100 black people showed up at his house because he kept yelling on video what his address was, and they were nonviolent, but they were basically awesome. I mean, I love the idea. I mean, I hate it, but if you're going to be yelling horrible things to black people and your address, I love that 100 black people would just show up and be like, oh, really? Is that right? And just jeer the guy. I enjoyed that. If that's the consequence for the most overt, horrible kind of racism, I am all for it. So, all right. Well, that's all the audio I have for you. Like I said, not a ton today, but still lots more news. And that now coming up in today's news dump.
Flying bat around the room looking for his lunch is sharing all its rabies on today's news dump.
Sharing all its rabies? Come on. You're giving bats a bad name. They don't all have rabies. And also, that did not sound like a rabid bat. All right. Thank you, Pete Coe, for another news dump jingle. All right, let's start with the headline that over 535 people have been charged after 6 months after the January 6th riot. It is exactly 6 months yesterday since the insurrection, and Department of Justice says it's charged over 535 defendants. U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia said in a statement that 495 defendants had been charged with entering or remaining in a restricted federal building or grounds. It added that nearly 235 defendants were charged with obstructing, influencing, or impeding an official proceeding or attempting to do so. And at least 165 were charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees. The FBI released 11 new videos of suspects violently assaulting officers during the Capitol riots. It continues. That's a good thing. I'm going to move on because it's the news dump. The state of Maryland is reporting that 100% of last month's coronavirus deaths were among the unvaccinated. How about that? No surprise there, but all COVID-19 deaths in Maryland last month were unvaccinated people. According to the Governor Larry Hogan's communications director, who tweeted that out. He also said that 95% of new COVID-19 cases were in unvaccinated people, and 93% of new coronavirus hospitalizations consisted of individuals who had not had the vaccine. I'll be talking with Dr. Megan May, I think, tomorrow about the latest on this. And let's see, what else do I have for you? Researchers are warning that a killing spree is wiping out wolves in Wisconsin. 1/3 of Wisconsin's gray wolf population most likely died from human activity in a matter of months. Researchers caution that removing federal protections on the species open the door for hunters to kill large numbers in short periods. In Michigan and Minnesota, legislators are weighing whether to open their states up to wolf hunting. Experts say that federal governments in both the UK and the US should recognize that loosening protections for predators and perhaps other controversial species opens the door for people to kill large numbers in short periods, legally and illegally. Terrible news there. The Fish and Wildlife Service removed gray wolves in the lower 48 states from its list of endangered and threatened species, but they may have to be moved back on. A lot of people talking about Nicole Hannah Jones yesterday, who is the woman behind the 1619 Project. Well, she was rejected for tenure at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and then they recanted after a huge public pressure campaign. They're like, no, you can have tenure. And she's like, you know what, fuck that. I'm going to take the job at Howard University, which is a historically black college university. And a lot of people were talking about that. I thought that was a really strong move by her. And bad for UNC. That's really bad for them, actually. 125 COVID-19 cases have been linked to a Texas church summer camp. How about that? Whoa, no surprise there, unfortunately. More than 125 people attended a summer camp run by a church in Texas have tested positive for COVID-19, according to its pastor. The camp regulations and protocols at my daughter's camp that they're going to are intense. They're doing a really very good job making sure that that nobody up there gets infected, and I applaud that, as onerous as it can be. But not at this camp. That's terrible. Did they not bathe them in the blood of Jesus at the camp on the way in? I thought that was supposed to inoculate you from COVID. Former Fox News, former NBC, former woman who said Santa is black, Megyn Kelly, is going to be hosting a new show at my old place, SiriusXM. That's right. She's getting probably a whole bunch of money to host an awful show because she's an awful person, and I'm really disappointed to hear that they hired her. Well, what can you do? I did my best, and now here I am, and really appreciate your support here on Independent Media, and that is it for today's news dump. That's all I've got for you today because I have two awesome guests joining me, and I want to get to them right now. Coming up, Dr. Mia Bloom will join me to talk about the new book she's co-authored, Pastels and Pedophiles, Inside the Mind of QAnon. We had a great conversation. She joined me for the first time. Very excited about that. But I spent about an hour talking with Barry Ritholtz yesterday about a whole bunch of things, a bunch of nonsense at the top that I kept in here because we always talk a lot of nonsense, and I thought it was pretty funny and interesting, as it always is with Barry Ritholtz, which is why he's one of your favorite guests. At Ritholtz on Twitter. The big picture is his blog. Of course, he's a financial portfolio. Well, he runs his own firm, Ritholtz Wealth Management. He is also hosts a show on Bloomberg Radio, and as well as it's also a podcast called Masters in Business. He wrote an awesome book a few years back called Bailout Nation, and he's a very popular commentator when it comes to all things finance, investment, economics, and even politics and behavior. And we always talk about a lot of stuff. I love talking with Ritholtz. And here is our latest conversation where we covered a whole lot of ground, including just general assholery and tomfoolery, which is where we
just take a sip of water.
It's so weird when people get bent out of shape, when people are jamming. People jam food in their mouth while you're interviewing them. I can't stand those high maintenance radio hosts who get annoyed when their guests jam food in their mouth while they're talking onto a mic.
So I never used to watch the show Frasier, right? I never used to watch the show Frasier, but I've run out of my favorite comedies that I've been streaming during lockdown, and we said, all right, let's give that a shot. And the only reason I'm still watching it is I find it so hilarious that he takes calls like you used to, that used to just shock me.
You hate callers. You hate people who are not, in your opinion, furthering the conversation.
Well, it's too time-consuming to deal with people's either ignorance or failure to just do basic research or, just good old-fashioned stupidity.
I hear you, but you should have more patience with people. There are so many listeners of mine that have been blocked by you.
By me?
Yeah. They're like, why does Barry Ritholtz block me?
Well, if you're an asshole on Twitter, I'm going to block you. I have a zero tolerance policy for assholes. So if you have someone who is blocked, if you DM me their stuff, I'll look up what they said and tell you whether or not they're unblock worthy.
Okay.
And every now and then there are false positives. I accidentally, sarcasm sometimes doesn't translate well into the written word. But so I forgot what I had a picture of the dog jumping off the wall in the pool, flying. The dog was flying. I thought, hey, that's a fun thing to post on July 5th on the day off. And some guy says to me, he goes, did you pay for that pool with your bailout money? It's like, you mean the book? Did I pay for it with the book, or should I just block you?
The book named Bailout Nation or the PPP loan.
That sort of stuff is just like, listen, there's 8 billion people in the world. If less than 1% of them are assholes, that's still a fuck ton of assholes in the world.
Yeah.
And I need less assholes in my life.
Well,
and I try hard. I know it's very easy for me personally to be an asshole. I drive fast cars.
You're definitely an asshole. What do you mean?
I can be. I have a high asshole potential. And so when I am outside of New York, I really try hard not to be that New York asshole.
It's when you're most an asshole, I think, because your main asshole feature, at least that I know, is your road rage. You have road rage.
I'm much better than I used to be. Since I installed the Sidewinder missiles on the car, I get tone, I hit launch, and I just go. And what happens, if I see that plume of smoke in the rearview mirror, it feels great.
So how do you
road
feel?
Rage is, how can you not have road rage?
I get it. I get it sometimes, but I think, to be honest with you, I wonder if so many of my choices now are made as a result of how would this affect my daughters.
So with me, it's how it affects my wife. So we're in the car just now. I had to go pick up one car and drop off the other.
Listen, if you die in a road rage, if you get shot or beat up,
right.
Your wife would be really upset, but she would be okay, whereas my daughters would not be okay.
Right. They'd have a great story.
That's...
Other than that,
you're really shining the turd of my road rage down. Jesus. How do you feel about, and be careful with your answer here, be thoughtful.
All right.
Don't be flip. Fireworks.
So I happen to have two dogs that are cool with fireworks. They're okay. I know a lot of people don't. They have to medicate their dogs and get a thunder blanket or dope them up. And I understand why people don't necessarily love fireworks. As a kid, that was like being high. Seeing the sky explode like that, it was fantastic. So I always had a warm, fuzzy place in my heart for fireworks. I can't, I don't want to become that curmudgeon, hey, you kids, get off my lawn. So I'm okay with fireworks. Yeah. I think people do stupid things with fireworks and blow off fingers and are reckless and irresponsible. But like a sanctioned, massive July 4th fireworks show, that's fantastic.
I will concede that to not be a curmudgeon, I am okay with a sanctioned, regulated fireworks display paid for with tax dollars, operated or paid for by, like the minor league baseball game we would go to.
Right.
But people setting them off at their homes is...
It's risky.
Here's the problem. Seriously, you live in a community. I don't bother you, you don't bother me in general, okay?
Right.
And it's Monday night. This is last night on the 5th, and it's 11:30, Ritholtz.
Yeah, we were getting fireworks last night, but remember, it's the 5th.
Those people should be arrested.
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
not
launch
cool.
fireworks
I'm with
late
you
at
on
night
that.
when people have to wake up and go to work. You're literally ruining. People have trouble sleeping. You're ruining someone's
I'm with
next
you.
day.
Listen, you wait for the sun to set. You do it at 9 o'clock. That's it.
That's like my threshold. 9 to 9:30. You want to do fireworks on a school night?
Yeah,
I still call it school night.
Fireworks then are fine. Midnight,
but it's still dangerous.
That's not right.
Yeah.
I'm with you. You got a fair case to make there.
They're in my pool.
Really?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it was like it was a firework and a pinky finger. It was really gross. The lady's finger.
Let's just hope it was a pinky and not,
it was a dick.
If it went off in someone's pocket,
well,
who knows what could...
I would have known what it was, what caused it. Oh my God! Or was that a threat?
Yours isn't jointed. You don't have. No. You can't make yours pick up a peanut or anything like that.
Elbow. All right. Let's
start recording.
Let's take it up a notch.
What do you say we start recording?
I've been recording. Here's
really. No one's going to want to hear any of this.
Please, I decide what people want to hear, and so far it's worked out pretty well. And now it's all going to be boring. We're going to start talking about your shit.
Yeah. Now let's talk about unemployment. By the way, I've been thinking about you repeatedly over the past couple of days.
Why were you at a male modeling?
A bunch of stuff happened, and every time something happened, I'm like, oh, Pete Dominic would just mock me to death over this.
What do you got? Give me one or two.
I sold a car. I bought a car.
Okay.
Which has been crazy because, I have too many cars. And suddenly, cars I have are worth more than I paid for them 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Oh, hold on. We got the Wambulance pulling up.
Uh-oh.
Up. The Wambulance is here for you. It is here to take your wines and
This
prize.
isn't whining. This is just me laughing.
I've got so many cars.
I've got two. Well, no, I don't sell cars. So when a car is done, it just sits on the driveway, and I'm like, all right, let me get another one.
Oh, what a burden! That's going to be a burden for your driveway space. What do you
That's
do
why
there?
we moved to the house with the bigger driveway just for all the
so
cars.
You just upgrade
it's
your
like
driveway.
A used car lot. I put, my neighbor doesn't like it, but I put the big balloon guy, this guy, down on the corner of the driveway, so they know cars are for sale.
The used car balloon guy. Yeah.
The guy waves his arms.
I'm hearing the listener mail come in, Civil War letter style. Dear Barry, I am so sorry that your burden has become unbearable.
Right.
With all of those cars taking up your driveway space.
And I'm
what is the other thing? So making fun of... Okay, what else you got?
So that was one thing you would make fun of me, and I if you remember my property, which has been just overrun with growth, I've been working on parts of it chunk by chunk.
And by working on it, you mean you hired a landscaper
and you told them what to do.
Well, I'm Jewish. What do you think? I'm out there with a hammer and shovel?
Listen,
well, that's not true, because I went out. I do work with a chainsaw. I had a big tree come down the other day. I chopped it up. We had a winter storm. A tree fell across my neighbor's driveway, and I just showed up with the chainsaw and started chopping it up and cleared it out. And they were like shocked that this minor act of kindness. But to me, I just want to use the chainsaw.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so much
That's
fun.
what I was going to say. You're not being
but it was
kind.
very nice to me. And then the same thing happened.
Yeah.
Ironically, I finished this person's driveway, and the next morning I wake up, I got a tree across my driveway. So I go out the next morning. And it's an electric chainsaw. It's charging.
Nice.
So I'm glad I remembered to plug it in. What
brand? Electric tools do you have?
Mikasa?
Don't know.
I'm not positive because I'm sending this WorkX terrible mobile power washer. You don't plug it in. It uses batteries. Not strong enough. You got to plug that in. I'm trying to stay away from gas and get everything electric. So the power washer I have, you make fun of me, but I power washed all the walkway and all the stonework and everything. That we bought a house that was kind of a wreck, and there's lots of work I do myself. Am I going to put in a new kitchen myself? No, I don't know how the hell to do that.
So what were you doing out in the lawn? And I would make fun of you because you were working on chunks of your overgrown. I mean, just the fact that you hire people. I already make the joke.
The previous owner. So Sandy was like 2010, 11, and
was that your landscaper or a hurricane?
What's that?
Was that the name of your landscaper or a hurricane?
No, that was the hurricane. So all the trees that went down, they just chopped them up and left them in place. Like, who the hell does that? So we've been. I'm on 2 acres.
That happened to me, by the way. That exact same. We had a giant 150-year-old oak taken down. They cut it into 100 sections that were 3 feet in diameter, and they left them there. And I was like, "What?
They're massive.
Have you tried to move one of these?
It's bigger than your fireplace, right?
But you know what I did? I put it on Craigslist.
Right.
That I had these trees, and
gone.
Guys showed up from
with tools, rakes and shovels and implements of destruction, and they
and for firewood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Anyway,
hey, listen, 150-year-old tree that fell naturally. That's the best firewood you can get.
Oh no, I had it chopped down for my solar panel to get more.
So when we've had the house evaluated for solar, they said you got to take these 30 trees down around your house in order for it to get enough sun for solar. I'm like, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? These are like, where I live, it's so wooded. These are like
that's an interesting. No, that's
old.
A fair question for people to ask. Go ahead though, but I think I can answer that, but I don't know if I'm right.
No, well, first of all, the trees are beautiful, and I don't want to take them down.
Fair enough.
And second, their lungs, they breathe in carbon dioxide and bring out oxygen.
Right.
Why would I want to take a couple of dozen trees down? Seems counterproductive.
Right.
And besides, I'm on natural gas for heat, and our local utility is natural gas. So in the scheme of things, it's certainly cleaner than coal and cleaner than a lot of other carbon-based energy sources. So I can live with that.
So, did you do it?
No. Not cutting down those trees.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I cut down. So what I did to do the yard, to re-landscape the yard, anything that fell, I cleared out. Anything that was old, sick, diseased, and a danger to either the neighboring houses or our house came down. And we just replanted a ton of stuff. And so I did it in blocks. I did the first one was like a 1/4 acre, and then the second one was a 1/4 acre. And then the screw up was 3 weeks ago. I'm like, let's do the third section. I was planning on doing them one per year, but last year we were sitting around, so we did one in the spring and one in the fall. I'm like, let's do the third section. And before checking to make sure that all the plants are available, we clear cut a whole bunch of stuff down. And so I feel very naked and vulnerable and exposed, because before I had this woodland between me and the street, and now I can actually see the street. And I'm a few weeks, it wasn't terrible, but everything that we're planting to replace the trees we took down, some stuff is 2 weeks away, some stuff is 3 weeks away, but I'm like, ugh, I should have thought of that before I took this down. Everybody's out of everything.
everybody's out of everything.
As you know. There's a shortage of houses. There's a shortage of chips. Lumber, go through the list.
I thought lumber came back down.
Prices have come down. It's still elevated from where it was a year ago, but look, the cure for high prices is high prices.
I don't think the issue with lumber was a shortage. I think you misspoke.
No, there's a pine beetle that's been destroying thousands of hectare-acres in Canada. And we get a lot of our lumber from Canada.
No doubt about it, but that's been going on for a long time. And my understanding was it was a shipping issue, a border issue, and things coming in and out of Canada. But I have a listener who takes down trees for a living in Maine. Shout out to Ryan. But he, and that's just based on his outfit. But they have tons of supply, and the issue of lumber, as the commodity prices there, I thought had to do with procurement or supply chain rather than getting things like everything else. Didn't the pandemic throw all of the supply chain and procurement procedures off, and the fact that
it's
companies don't keep inventory on hand for economic reasons that we can argue about, and so there's shortages. Like, is it a matter of supply or it getting to where it needs to go? That's my question.
It's many things. It's supply. It's a supply chain. So it's inventory, supply chain, transport. Everybody likes simple answers, but the world is much more complicated than that. It's a lot of moving parts. I'm always shocked when I see somebody on Twitter or somewhere else say, this is terrible because of X. And it's like, well, X is a factor, but so is Y, Z, and 1, 2, 3.
There lies the nature of Twitter, though. That's you try to fit in a point, and you can't. There needs to be more words because of what you just said. Things are complex. It's not that easy.
Well, but things are complex. That's 3 words. You can fit that into Twitter.
Well,
you could say, hey, there are a lot of different aspects to this, but I think this is significant, and do a tweet stream. And I love doing tweet streams or tweet threads or storms or whatever you want to do, because it allows you to get past that 280 character limitation. Listen, after the January 6th insurrection, I started this tweet storm, and after like a dozen tweets, I kind of stopped myself and said, all right, that's good for now. And over the today is 6 months since January 6th. Since that began, once a week or so, something comes up that I'll send this to you. I just add to the end of that list, and that list is just mind-bogglingly horrifying.
What is it? I don't know what you're talking. I never saw this.
Oh, really?
I don't think
so. Let me share that with you, because I thought the thing was pretty substantial. It's massive. I mean, it's just gotten out of hand. It's so big. From January 10th, the insurrection was much uglier than it looked. We're learning more about plans for grabbing the Electoral College vote, participants with police-military background, Taliban-style videotape confessions, executions of Congress members. That was planned. This was not a bloodless coup. It's treason. And then I just, bang through a bajillion of these.
The more we learn about this insurrection, the more it looks like a genuine attempted coup.
So here, scroll through it. You don't have time to look at it now, but it just keeps going. And all of these are links to articles that have done a lot of research and a lot of specifics and different graphics depicting exactly what happened. And you think in January it stops, but it keeps going.
Well,
you have to hit show more.
It's a fascinating, if not terrifying, event that not unlike 9/11 has so many different threads to trace down, so many different people involved, so many different angles to take, and it's being minimized by those who are basically defending it as anything from a tourist. There were tourists.
How dumb are those sons of bitches? It's a tourist thing.
Well, those are the dumbest. That seems like the dumb. Well, I guess the dumbest is saying that they were not Trump supporters or that they were the FBI or whatever. But that's the second dumbest.
Did you happen to catch 60 Minutes this week?
No, I missed it.
So they they talk about the fire hose strategy of disinformation, that it's not an accident that it's just endless streams of bullshit, because it's flooding the zone. You just can't do anything. You spend 2 minutes trying to correct one thing. Yeah. There's 10 more things of nonsense. By the way, this sort of propaganda is the tool of totalitarian communists. This came out of
I've
Soviet
talked about
Russia.
that with so many experts. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so many. I mean, have you read the historians on that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so
they're
right
horrified.
Out of it. Yeah.
So it's ironic. You go back and forth. Was Trump a Manchurian candidate? Was he a Russian double agent? Was he just a useful idiot?
Yes.
Or was he so clever at social media and recognized the effectiveness of the propaganda tools that the commies used that he just said, well, just because it's Soviet doesn't mean I can't effectively use it. And, I don't know the answer where he was. I'm pretty confident that I can say he could be the least patriotic president in history. Beyond that,
I mean,
I can't figure out what the hell.
That's an understatement. I mean, I'm so tired of talking about him, and yet I'm not. But I think the easiest way to look at. But you notice
we're at minute 22 when he comes up.
No, I know,
and not the whole conversation.
I'm fine with it.
I'm happy to move beyond this.
I know, but let me just say that there's the idea that there would be a question of. I don't even like the idea of patriotism. Offends me almost. It's a silly idea. It's so easy to unpack and debunk and for who? Patriotism for who? What does it mean? I was born here. I didn't even understand. I'd rather be patriotic about the community I live in or the team that I actually participate in. I don't even get it. Is the point. And I think that talking about him in terms of patriotism is silly. He only cares about himself. Period. There's no other detail about his psychology that matters. That's it. Only cares about himself. Period. You stopped listening to me.
I'm right here. I'm right here with you.
No,
don't care. The one thing that has been consistent the entire Trump era is that massive projection pretty much explains everything. Everything.
Yeah.
Because whatever he says, it's like, well, of course, Hunter would engage in nepotism. Who wouldn't? Of course, he would try and influence a foreign power. That's what you do, right? I mean, it's just whatever. Of course, Hillary needs to be locked up. We don't know exactly what, but we're all pretty sure she's a criminal because. Why wouldn't she cheat on her taxes? Why wouldn't she? So I'm really convinced that anything he says that you're outraged by, aside from the fire hose of bullshit approach, is him sort of revealing who he is.
Yeah.
It's all projection.
It's always been the case, even before he, even on The Apprentice and before. I want to ask you about the housing market.
Let's talk about the housing market.
Where are we, and how do you have a conversation about the housing market with a national audience? Because it's somewhat regional, isn't it?
So, first, when you're talking to a national audience, you talk about what isn't regional. So, interest rates aren't regional. Mm-hmm. Get a 30-year fixed mortgage for $285. That's historically low. A few months ago, it was a little lower than that, but that's incredibly low rates compared to my first house. I think it was 7.5%. And it's only gone down my entire adult life. But I think that I'm not trying to call a bottom in mortgage rates. It's hard to see rates really appreciably falling from here. But if they do, it means something has gone terribly wrong. I mean, this is the cheapest. But, there's no free lunch because when rates go lower, home prices go higher because people don't care what they pay for a house. They care what their monthly nut is. And so as long as I'm making up a number, as long as my mortgage is $1,000 a month, if that's a $100,000 house with a 10% mortgage or a $500,000 house with a 2% mortgage, nobody cares. You're funding it over 30 years.
Right. Should they care?
I mean, there's nothing they could do about it. Rates are going to be where they are. Home prices are going to be where they are.
But is it a responsible fiscal decision to be like, I can afford that monthly payment?
No, that's not irresponsible.
But it's a $1 billion house. I'm going to have to pay for it forever.
Then you can't afford it. If you can't pay it off in 20 to 30 years, then you can't afford it. That's your answer. If it's like, well, if you go to Japan, they have 100-year mortgages.
They do?
It's
What?
3 generations, yeah. That's
Wow,
insane.
I've never heard of that.
Oh, yeah, Google it. That's old news.
Okay, so so that's one thing that you can't control, the housing, the interest rates, and talking about how we have a
and
conversation
the price of
about
houses. So,
but you were being critical of somebody the other day on this in terms of
for a change.
Who is it? Yeah, for projections about the housing market and where we're at. So where are we at?
Oh, so Ed Pinto, that tweet, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So first of all, you have to understand who Ed Pinto is. Ed Pinto is Peter Wollaston's partner, and Peter Wollaston was the guy on the Financial Crisis Investigation Committee, the Republican, who is so batshit crazy that even the Republican committee members wouldn't sign off on his lunacy. Wollaston and Pinto were both members of AEI, which is a batshit crazy, formerly respectable think tank, and they didn't want to say that radical deregulation was to blame. They didn't want to say that Congress giving non-bank lenders a free hand.
This was the investigatory commission that was created to investigate the global financial crisis.
Right.
Yep.
So Ed Pinto and Peter Wollaston said, essentially, poor black people are to blame. And the way they said that was, first they said, well, it's the Veterans Lending Act, and then it's the Fair Housing Act, and then it's the Community Reinvestment Act, and then it's Fannie and Freddie. And every time they floated the theory, people would come out and just savage it because it was so fucking stupid. My favorite was the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, which was a 70s era Carter piece of legislation that was designed to stop banks from redlining. Banks would go into a neighborhood, open up a branch, suck up all the local cash, all the local deposits, and then send that money to the high-priced parts of the state. And what the CRA says is, hey, you don't have an obligation to open a branch in Harlem, but if you do, you have to service the local residents. You have to make loans to the residents who are giving you their deposits, because that's how fractional lending works. A deposit comes in for $100, and then you can lend out $1,000 against it. That's fractional lending, and it's been very effective. So you can't open a branch on 130th Street and then draw a red line on a map and say, don't make any mortgage loans here. So when people were blaming this anti-racist, anti-structural racism, anti-redlining act for the housing crisis, I'm like, well, if that was the case, let's assume you're right. If this Community Reinvestment Act was to blame, well, then wouldn't the housing boom and bust have been in D.C., and the bad South Philadelphia and the bad parts of Chicago and Oakland and in all the slums? Why wasn't it in the outskirts of Atlanta? Why, pray tell, would the Community Reinvestment Act apply to the desert of Las Vegas and parts of California and Arizona and Florida? Those were the 4 biggest areas. How does that? And I just have no patience for people who are paid whores to defend the interests of people who just don't give a shit. And just like, we're going to say or do what we want because we make more money that way.
And I'm so glad.
That's Ed Pinto. So when Ed Pinto is in an article, Peter Wollaston's partner was in an article about, I'm the most bullish I've been on housing in a long time. Well, if this asshole is bullish, sell. Because that's the most bearish thing I've seen. And I had to say it because anybody who knows that crew, the AEI, Peter Wollaston, Ed Pinto crew, and the endless, we talked about fire hose of bullshit, the fire hose of bullshit they put out about housing, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, and just to be clear,
contemptible weasels.
I love it. I love it. I love all of it. But the commission that was created by Congress to look into the causes of the financial crisis, this is one of the most outrageous things that people don't know about, but I remember learning about it from you and others because you talked about this incessantly, and it was so important.
Yeah, I was a little pissed off.
And Taibbi wrote about it a lot at the time. Yeah. But is that a detective looking into a crime was told you cannot, in this report, admit what actually caused the crime.
Right.
Or who
and you
was
can't
involved.
use these words.
And you can't literally
use
these certain words. And it's the craziest thing. It really is to create. It's not unlike the 1-6 Commission. It's like they don't want to look into these crimes. They don't want us to know
and I sound like Alex Jones or Tucker Carlson, but Republicans don't want you to know the truth about what created or caused the collapse of the economy.
You know, a lot of people are looking at the Republicans like the whole Trump era stuff is new. Hey, this goes back way before this. This goes back.
Climate,
you know, they dragged their feet on the 9/11 Commission. They dragged their feet on the Financial Crisis Commission. And here's why emotionally I'm an independent, and I can't be a Republican because they're just lost touch with reality. But the Democrats are just so, like, the GOP held 197 or whatever the number was, Benghazi investigations and committees and this and that. What the fuck are the Democrats doing? Hey, we're going to do this panel. You want 5 seats? It's up to you. All right? And by the way, the real crazies in your party aren't allowed. Give us 5 people. And if you don't want to give us 5 people, well, fuck you. I'm going to run it through 9 different committees at once, and it'll be wall to wall, just like Benghazi was wall to wall. It will be wall to wall, and we will make sure that none of the weasels who participated in this are not painted with a scarlet
letter. Your
letter.
analysis of that is erroneous for the same reason you said earlier. It's simplifying a far more complex issue in terms of what Democrats need to be investigating versus what Republicans were just making up crimes to investigate. Right. There's 800 things that they could be investigating. They impeached Trump twice. And
they should investigate all of that. Just do it constantly.
Well, I would. The criticism,
and we're now 6 months into this, and I don't know why it hasn't started already.
The criticism I make about Democrats is
literally it's 6 months to the day. Why aren't we 4 months into the second investigation?
Well, they
reverse the roles, and what would have happened?
I am open to that criticism, but I think that it's still. There's a lot of complexities there in terms of dealing with a pandemic, for one.
Yes.
And the priorities, and I do believe you can do many things at once. My criticism is the people that are often running these committees are like 90. You've got people and they're ineffective. Nadler in the House, Pat Leahy in the Senate, great guys. They've served whatever. I don't know how,
They served a century honorably.
They should not be, They should not
I'm with you.
They should have these young guns who are across the political spectrum leading these investigations. All right,
I'm with you. I can't argue with that.
When you're talking about the housing market being bullish or bearish, I feel like the housing market should be referred to in terms of buyers and sellers market because those are two different parties that have completely different interests. Unless you're the real estate agent who is on both sides of the deal. Unless you're a real estate agent double dipping. But a bullish housing market means it's a great time to sell your house. It's a great time to buy a house. What does that even mean?
Bullish and bearish just refers to the direction of price. So it's a seller's market today because prices have run up. There's not a lot of inventory. And so that's, that's pretty...
What are you looking up or doing right now?
I was looking up the FCIC while we were speaking.
All right, well, let's move on. I want to move on.
All right, I'm going to stop multitasking.
Stop multitasking. We're doing a goddamn interview on the most popular podcast.
Right. And I'm trying to get the data for you as we're doing it. You can tell when I'm multitasking.
I can always tell that with you. I can also tell when you're eating while we're talking because I can see you jamming the food into your mouth and you're making those awful noises.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Those
You used to get so upset in the studio. I would bring donuts for everybody and pastries, and I would just have a sip of coffee, and you would lose your mind.
Oh, that's because you're one of those people. I don't have a lot of these weird picadillos.
Like that.
I don't think I'm too high maintenance with that. I do have a thing about people, specifically with coffee and pastries, because people do make a choice to put them both in their mouth at the same time, and I find that reprehensible.
I just loved watching you get so angry.
You would take a bite of a goddamn croissant that you would bring from some, place where they're $9 a piece, which was we loved it. We always loved when you came. And
everybody loved all the pastries except you. You would just get angry.
Yeah, because I had to watch.
Don't eat angry, Pete.
You put in a croissant in your mouth.
The whole croissant.
No bite. And chew it up, and then you throw coffee in that same mouth, and it was And then you would analyze the financial
With
crying.
my mouth open. You know I was doing that on purpose, right?
I don't think you were then, and I don't think you're being honest now. I think that...
Oh, no, I loved making you crazy with that. It was hilarious.
I miss seeing you because I don't get any of those.
I know,
those
it's so
gifts.
fun.
Okay, so I also wanted to talk to... I mean, listen, I don't want to talk about the
Do we
Larry...
want to talk housing? Because housing will eventually stabilize.
Well, do you want to make any predictions on the time period?
Tuesday around 1:47 p.m.
You hate predictions and you criticize those who make them.
So here's the two really interesting things. I want to talk about employment. I want to talk about housing.
Yeah, that's what I want to get to, employment.
So the housing thing is one of the data points that I think people don't realize is new home construction collapsed heading into the financial crisis of 08-09. Housing collapsed before the market did. The stock market did. So housing peaked in 05 and volume and 06 in price, unless I got that backwards. And then it was straight down. So housing had a crappy 07 and then just really fell apart in 08. And so during that period, the 5 years following the financial crisis, builders stopped making single-family homes. They started making apartments and multifamily homes. And now fast forward 12 years, and there's a shortage of homes. What ended up happening is the technical term is called household formation. People who are in 20-something, 30-something, you form a household when you get married and move in somewhere. A rental, a purchase, doesn't matter. But normally household formation precedes home ownership. And you had a very low rate of household formation in the decade that followed the crisis because... you graduate into a bad economy and you come out. Maybe you're making a little less. Maybe you don't have the sort of job or career track you were expecting. That's going to affect subsequent home purchases. And so you had all these things leading to just after overbuilding for a couple of years into the financial boom, the bust led to a solid 5 to 8 years of dramatic underbuilding. And so the population keeps growing, and suddenly the economy starts to get better around 14, 15, 16, and now households are starting to form, and there's a giant dearth of supply of homes. And so now the inventory the new home building starts to tick up, and then bang, 2020, everything grinds to a halt, and then things get crazy. So I think that's the most significant data point that people just don't realize. We were building a certain number of houses relative to, new marriages, people moving in together. Mm-hmm. And then that fell off a cliff. And now we suddenly find ourselves, I'm guessing, about 2 to 3 million houses short. And that's going to be an issue. It'll be interesting to watch all the overbuilt office space get converted to, some of the overbuilt office space get converted to residences at some point over the next
That's
couple
a really
of years.
Fascinating thing. How sure are
Think
you
about
that
Hudson Yards and Midtown. And,
you're talking about New York. Is that happening?
All the big cities. Any decent-sized city.
Yeah. And you've seen that throughout history in different ways. But
post 9/11, look what happened to Lower Manhattan. That became very residential relative to what it was.
Was that post 9/11 that it became really the hip?
It started beforehand, but it really accelerated after 9/11.
Yeah. So all right. So that goes on for the next.
So there's 46 minutes to start talking about something something related to markets.
I love how self-conscious you get about the content here.
I run a tight ship on my interview show.
I know your interview show is listen.
It's very serious.
I know, but it is. You must be a goddamn nightmare because you.
No, I'm great.
Yeah, you are because your producers. You say, take that out, take this out.
Oh no, because so you don't hear it in the final version, but I'll be mid-sentence and say, let me rephrase that because I sound like an idiot, and then I'll re-say it.
Yeah, and I'm telling you.
And they know exactly, the engineers know exactly what to do.
I know, but I don't think that's necessary. I think maybe it is. Maybe that's a Bloomberg thing
or
a radio
at
thing.
At XM Satellite or anywhere, anywhere else, these guys run a very tight ship, and I get it. I know what they do.
I get it too, but I'm just saying, I'll never forget when I learned the new, certainly with podcasts, it's a completely different set of rules. And it was when I was listening to, the thing is be interesting, but even that could be broken. I'm listening to Joe Rogan. It's the most popular podcast in the country. Yeah. And his guest couldn't hear. His headphones were down. They worked it out.
And he kept that in.
And he kept it in. Then I listened to this guy, Gary Vee, who's also very, very popular. His guests weren't even mic'd. And there aren't really that many rules. For me, the rule is be interesting. No matter what you're doing, being interesting. So whether we're talking about, like, the least interesting thing today was when you were talking about your landscaping project. But then
So take that out.
But then it did get interesting at the end with the choice that you had to make.
Right. So every now and then
it's worth it that I keep it in because I'm going back to it to make fun.
You're circling back. Every now and then you'll hear on the podcast, I'll say something and the guest will say, "Can you say that?" I'm like, no, we'll take that out.
I know, and that's a goddamn nightmare for your producer to edit.
No, I just leave that in. That's fun because I tell them. So I'll give you a funny example. So I'm interviewing somebody who was on the board of directors, amongst his CV, he was on the board of directors of MSG, which is owned by the Dolans that also own the Knicks, right? And I'm a Knicks fan, and I think the Dolans are the worst basketball owners in the league.
Yeah.
So we start chatting about his experience, and I just, in the podcast, I say, completely unscripted, I say, the Dolans, they're not such young spring chickens anymore. And I know a guy who's got plenty of money. I think we could cut a deal to sell the Knicks. Mike Bloomberg is always looking for things to do. He's a very philanthropic guy. He's always looking for things to do to help the city of New York. And I'm not officially an authorized spokesperson, but I'm pretty confident I could squeeze $2 billion out of him to buy the Knicks. So let's get, the Dolans, I know Mike, let's get him in a room and bang out the details of this. So we start going back and forth, and he says something, I'm like, all right, so 2.2, do we have a deal? And the whole digression is just hilarious. And I know not a second of it's going to make the air, but I can't help it because it's so good.
Yeah, I'm going to actually edit what you just said out. So my final question and subject with you is the job market. And you are one of people's favorite people to listen to talk about these issues because you always consider psychology and behavior. And so there's been so much analysis for years about, when government aid creates a lack of motivation and laziness. And we are hearing this at a fever pitch now because of the pandemic and the government aid that went out. And now I can't find anybody to come work at my restaurant. And the bottom line to me is, depending on who you're arguing, anybody can be right about economics if all you use is anecdotes. If I say, listen, I know this store can't find anybody, or I know a guy who admitted he's not going back to work because why would he? He's getting a check. That's not how we should look at, examine, analyze, or argue about economics, much less this issue. So when it comes to the job market,
once you start with anecdotes, you're already going down a bad path.
Right. So how do you look at that issue of the financial aid that went out? So
first, again, start with the basic premise. This is really complex and nothing is black and white. So I imagine that on the fringes, the bonus unemployment insurance payments, for some people, maybe that's the deciding factor. But I think that's modest. And why do I think that's modest? Well, rather than go by the anecdotes, let's talk about the broadest data. And there are two data points that I think are very telling here. The first is something called the quits rate. I've written about this. And the quits rate are what is the percentage of people with full-time paying jobs who say to their boss, thanks a lot, I'm out of here. And they quit and they go elsewhere. Either they're unemployed or retired or working elsewhere. The quits rate is at a record high now. Now, what is that telling us? First, that's telling us there's a ton of demand for labor, so people feel confident they could leave one job and leave the stability of an existing job and get another job elsewhere.
Now, does that apply to all types of job, minimum wage, blue collar, white collar?
Any type of job. It's if you have a full-time job, I would double check that, but I'm pretty sure if you have a full-time job and you quit, you go into the quits data. And normally that's like 0.5%, 0.75%. It's 2.7%. It's the most it's ever been. Stop and think about that. You have 100 people who work, and 3 people each month are quitting and going elsewhere. Huge. Says they're very self-confident about their prospects, about the economy. It's very positive.
Well, sometimes people would react to that data point, as I have in the past, until you're kind of explaining it. Quitting your job doesn't mean because you want to go sit on the beach and not work anymore. It's a metric of, no, I'm finding a better job that I like more for any number of reasons. Money, situation.
And we just talked about anecdotes, so I don't want to give any specific anecdotes, but we all are aware in a lot of companies that sometimes you hit a certain ceiling as to what your earning capacity or responsibility or role is. And if you want to move up, sometimes you have to leave that job and go elsewhere.
Yep.
Right? If it's a small firm and there's a dozen people and, hey, you can't be vice president because there's only one vice president and he's not going anywhere.
And he's 16. He's never going to retire, by the way.
So the quits rate is one factor. But here's the other factor. And let's take your anecdote. And I've written about the Pittsburgh Gazette story about this ice cream parlor that pays $7.50 an hour, and they weren't getting anybody. They doubled it to $15, and they got over 1,000 applications.
Ice cream
I wrote about this a while ago, but that's one anecdote. It's pretty clear to most people that it's not just wages. It's on the low end, it's mostly wages. In the middle and the upper end, it's wages, it's control over their time, it's control over their schedule, it's control over how they do their work, who's looking over their shoulder,
and now
the
with
ability
the pandemic,
to work from home, to not interface with the public, to manage the kids. But let's stick with your friend, the restaurant owner, who's complaining he put an ad in the paper and he got no applications for 3 weeks. And I just had this conversation with a restaurant owner last week. And the conversation was, so when the pandemic started and we went to lockdown last March of 2020, your waiters and bartenders and servers and busboys and kitchen help and dishwashers, what do you think they were doing? You think they were just sitting around and saying, this is a hard job. It's not a career. It's pretty low paying, except for only the best restaurants, most expensive restaurants. Can you really earn a good salary? You can earn a decent salary at a middle of the road restaurant, but a seasonal restaurant that's only open, for the summer, or it's a hard job and it's not a good job. When everybody was locked down starting in March, anecdotally, you hear lots and lots of stories about people going back to school and people getting trained and people launching businesses. And that last one, we don't need the anecdote. We could go to the data. 2020 was one of the highest years for new business formation that we've seen in a long time. And that tells me that a lot of people said, I'm not going to continue being a fill in the blank. Waiter, receptionist, hotel maid, whatever. I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to build my skill stack, and I'm going to get either another job or launch my own business. And the data is the huge number. I don't know if it was record setting, but I know it's very high number of new business that were formed in 2020 and continued into this year. So if you can't hire people because you think they're sitting at home waiting for you to call and they don't want to give up their unemployment, I got bad news for you. It's 16 months. Those people, Elvis has left the building. Those people are no longer in the food service, restaurant, and bar industry or the hotel management business industry. They've left that sector and they've gone elsewhere. Now, I'm not suggesting that they were a bartender last year and they're doing brain surgery this year, but there are lots and lots of businesses that you can do if you're hardworking and smart and put in the hours. And I think a lot of people just said, I don't want to be dependent on a restaurant. I don't want to interface with the public. I don't want to bust my ass for long hours. I want a little more control of my life and my work, quality of the work I do. And I think a huge swath of those people just tapped out of the restaurant industry, tapped out of the hotel industry. Look at the trucking industry. The trucking industry is having a massive problem finding enough truckers to drive back and forth across country delivering goods. Why is that? Because nobody's going into that industry, because how long is it before these trucks are self-driving? It's not 50 years.
But that's not why people aren't. That can't be why people are not going in.
It's a hard gig. It's you're driving.
Well, yeah,
Who wants to drive?
There's other reasons. No, I mean, do you really think
Who wants to drive 3,000 hours a year?
A lot of my listeners. But no, listen, I agree with you. But
listen,
I'm just
your listeners are commuting every day. They're driving 250 hours, 500 hours.
Yeah.
Now imagine being in your truck or your taxi 10 hours, 12 hours a day. Oh, and sleeping in the back of the truck. That's a tough job.
Well, shout out to Randolph and Andrew, who off the top of my head I know are doing it.
Ask those guys, hey, how hard is your job? How much do your significant other and family members want you to quit that job? And what else could you do? What else might you want to do instead of that? So to me, when I hear people say, oh, it's just unemployment benefits, well, some asshole on Fox News is banging that drum constantly. But if we're honest, I'm honest enough to say, sure, I imagine at the margin, some people will say,
at the margin,
I'm gonna just keep my feet up on the.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people, not every school is reopened, so people have childcare issues. But I think more importantly, the low-paying, back-breaking, unpleasant jobs. A lot of those people said, hey, I got a year to figure something else out. And they did.
And we don't make policy based on the margins. We make policy based on...
Well, we do, but that's because we're stupid.
Well, sometimes we do, and that's because we're stupid. But we don't make policy on, for example, fireworks, because one hockey player fucking died or one kid got blown up. Like
Who died? A hockey player died?
An NHL hockey player, a goalie, was in a hot tub, and someone started shooting the fireworks at each other. And he jumped out of the hot tub and somehow landed on his head.
Oh, so it wasn't the fireworks. It was the fact that he
it was. If they weren't shooting fireworks at him, that's usually, Barry, how people die, because a firework hit them.
He should have just put on the goalie mask.
That's not funny.
The pads.
I'm
This is a real thing. You're not just making this up.
No.
Now I'm going to have to Google this.
NHL player, fireworks. I forget his name. It's like, of course, Russian, because he's a hockey player.
Oh, this is a real thing. I thought you were just joking around.
Yeah.
NHL player has died after being hit by fireworks on the 4th of July.
We don't make policy.
He was struck in the chest. Oh no! So he didn't.
Oh, I read that he fell. Oh, it says he did die of chest trauma. Oh my God! Yikes!
Authorities initially investigating the head injury theory because several witnesses reported seeing him fall and strike the ground.
Yeah, well, the point is we don't make policy on fireworks based on this accident. We don't on the margins. When we do make the worst policy that we're making is now on voting, based on the fact that there's no policy needed. Like that is black and white. As a matter of fact, we're demanding nuance, but it is black and white that there has been no outcome of any election that has been affected by fraud or any other kind of excuse.
Modern election, anyway. So here's what here's what I want us to do for to stop voter fraud. When you're born and given a birth certificate, you should also be given a voter certificate. You should be registered to vote the day you're born. Suppress that, motherfucker. Let's see what you got to say about that.
Well, and now that is all we have for Senator Ritholtz's congressional speech.
Right.
Suppress that, motherfucker.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much.
I'd like to hear from the congressman from Oedipus to respond to that. No, seriously. At NPS, I love the idea, and I don't know if it originated with Cory Booker, but I heard it from Cory Booker.
That I did.
Put $5,000 into every newborn's. Give them baby bonds, $5,000 portfolio.
Yeah.
And by the time they go to college, that should be worth enough to pay for college.
I never heard that idea.
Yeah, no, I believe that's Cory Booker. I could be wrong.
Everybody wins. I'm thinking of all the different interests there, and everybody wins.
Oh, God. Think about how
the government.
Oh, my God, you're giving away so much money. Think about what you're doing. Think about. Hold on. I want to say the baby bonds were what
Republicans
some people
would go for it because they would then try to privatize it. The investment.
Growing momentum for baby bonds as Booker Presley reintroduced landmark legislation. This was in February.
Wow.
So here, let me send you this. I'm sending you stuff. I just think that's a great idea, and I'm happy to spend tax dollars on that. P.S. If you're here's my road rage rant lately. And I'm glad we passed some form of infrastructure, although not that you can tell from the Biden administration.
Wow,
they should be out pounding.
States are looking at this baby bonds thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think if you're a congressman, you should be humiliated that the roads of America are in the condition.
I'm always open to your rant on infrastructure.
It's just and I haven't been abroad in 18 months or longer than that. So it's just every time I drive, and I was in Farmingdale today, which is a lower income, not low income, just lower income than where I am, than Oyster Bay, and the roads are horrible. I'm like, you should be humiliated to show your face in Congressman. I wish you could commit Harry Carey every day, but the first time is usually enough. But you should just be, I don't know how they could show their faces in public.
Just hand out swords.
I don't know why people aren't, every time a congressman shows up anywhere, saying, why the fuck aren't you fixing the roads, asshole? Make the roads travelable. Why are our mass transit so awful?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're getting hung up on roads.
Can't get through a tunnel.
Are lead pipes threaded throughout our nation.
Fix it. Although some people think that that's not infrastructure. We're wasting money.
You wrote a blog entry at The Big Picture about raising the gas tax to pay for this.
Oh, my God. Come on.
Raise the damn gas tax is the title.
It's been frozen since 1993. Here's what I think. I think everybody in America, every time you get a blowout on the highway and every time you break an axle, and every time something on the highway happens, you should take that piece of shit broken part and throw it on Grover Norquist's front lawn. I want his front lawn to look like a garbage dump. Because if you have to, since I dropped the F-bomb before, since if you have to point to one motherfucker in America who's responsible for the state of the roads, it's that asshole.
And
that asshole.
The state of America's problems, if you had to point to one.
Yeah, no, he's one of the key people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but if you want nice things, you have to pay for them. And that includes shit like an electrical grid, right? But by the way, I'm going to share one more theory
Grover Norquist, of
with
course,
you.
in case anybody doesn't know, makes every single Republican at every level of government sign an oath called the pledge. That they will never raise any tax, period, which is the goddamn dumbest policy.
It's been very effective. It's allowed a minority party to retain control.
And it's destroyed the country from within.
So here's my pet theory that I've been. This is still in beta form, so I haven't finished it. So I'm not looking for a lot of criticism, but I'm just going to float it to you. The nicer your weather is as a region, as a state, the worse your government is because you can get away with it. So think about Texas and Southern California and Florida. You could be the dumbest, stupidest governments, but people still come to that part of the world because the weather is tolerable. And that's how you have bad shit happening all the time in Texas and all the time in Florida. But if Minnesota has people moving in there and businesses starting, no one's going to Minnesota for their weather. It has to be a well-managed state. So that's the theory I'm playing with. It doesn't explain Alabama or, there are holes in the theory.
Yeah.
Hey, New York has shitty weather and shitty government. So although it's better in some areas than others.
Did you see the map? This went viral today. A picture of the map of the United States with blue states and red states, or Biden states and Trump states, overlaid with vaccination rates.
So that's the wrong way.
I think it's almost
that's the
identical.
wrong way to do it. You have to do it by county because it's far more. And I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. If you look at it by county, it's horrifying. It's bad enough by states, but when you break it down by county, it's so granular and it's amazing. I haven't seen today's, but a number of people have been talking about this.
Is there
an
obvious explanation there?
So it's a chicken and egg thing. Is it are Trumpers? Are people Trumpers because they're anti-vaxxers, or have they become anti-vaxxers because they were Trumpers, or do just dumb people listen to dumb leaders and do dumb stuff? P.S. The vast majority of people who are dying of COVID these days are unvaccinated. My wife and I were out in Suffolk County over the weekend, out at her parents' place in the Hamptons, Don't get excited. Her dad bought it in 1961. It's a tiny 3-bedroom,
worth $5 billion
little cottage. But anyway, we went into the supermarket. And my wife whips out a mask and puts it on. I'm like, honey, what are you doing? We're vaccinated. What's the problem? Mm-hmm. She's like, this is deep red Trump country, and I'm going to bet that half the people you see walking around without masks are not vaccinated. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I think she's right. So, yes, you are correct. Send me a link to that. I want to see it. But when you look at it on a county-by-county basis, it's even more harrowing.
Barry F. Ritholtz, ladies and gentlemen.
Did I ever show you my F-bomb?
No, but what is? I don't know what your middle name is. I just made that up.
Lawrence.
Oh.
So here's my F-bomb. Let's show this to you.
There's a picture for people listening.
No, it's three-dimensional.
It's got the letter F, and it's kind of a metal thing welded to a cartoon.
Don't you watch cartoons as a kid?
Cartoon bomb. It looks like a
bomb.
bowling ball with a wick.
Dude, didn't you watch
the
Roadrunner? If you don't know what that is, I mean, if my F-bomb is not understandable, then
I love that. I'll have to take a picture of that and send it to me, and I'll include it in promotion of this conversation. All right? I'm going to hit stop now. All right, there he goes, everybody. At Ritholtz, Barry Ritholtz. Always a lot of fun to talk to him. We get together at least once a month here on the show. But go over there and let him know on the Twitter at Ritholtz that you heard him here, that you like him here, listen to his podcast, Masters and Business, and definitely read his blog and sign up for his daily reads. The Big Picture, so good, so good. Always hope you enjoyed that. And now I'm very excited to introduce you for the first time here on this show to Dr. Mia Bloom. She is the co-author of a very interesting and I think important new book called Pastels and Pedophiles Inside the Mind of QAnon. She co-wrote it with a psychologist and expert in extremism named Dr. Sofia Moskalenko. But Dr. Mia Bloom is a professor at Georgia State University. How about that? With Professor Eric Siegel, although I guess they don't know each other. But she's an international security fellow as well at New America. She's a member of the evidence-based cybersecurity research group. She's authored several books on violent extremism, including Small Arms, Children and Terrorism. And we had a great conversation. I was really happy to have her on the show for the first time to talk about this new book. Ladies and gentlemen, I now bring you Dr. Mia Bloom. Mia, thank you so much for joining me. Such an interesting, fascinating, important, and timely book, and I'm really glad to have you here to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, we really felt it was important to explain what was going on, but also because Sophia is both a board-certified clinical and social psychologist, she wanted to give people ideas about how to get someone out of QAnon, because of 30 million people in the United States, there's probably someone in your family or in your wider network that believes in this global cabal, and you want to help them get out instead of just shunning them.
I've talked a little bit about both of your backgrounds, but would you mind telling me a little bit about like kind of your work and what you bring to this book, as well as what Sophia's work is and what she brings to the book? I'm always like more attracted to books written by two people, two experts who are clearly collaborating on these issues because of obvious reasons. So what is it that you both kind of bring in terms of your work to this important issue and book?
Sophia and I have known about each other for years, because she was the leading expert on the psychology of terrorism, and I was writing first on suicide terrorism, then women in terrorism, then children in terrorism. So we knew each other, but we'd never had more than a 5-minute conversation. And what had happened was I had spent about a year trying to convince all these people, hey, would you like to write a book about QAnon? Because I have my own imprint at Stanford Press. And all these people, either they would ignore me or they would ghost me, or, you know, they're all writing books now. But I went around, and after about a year, the president of the press said, you know, you've been looking at QAnon now for a year. I bet you could write a book. And I said, well, maybe if I had some help. And so I totally catfished Sophia, and I like called her, and I was, you know, it's like that in Shrek, the little cat, you know, with the big eyes begging. I basically catfished her to help me write this book. And so we got together. Hilarious. And I would do half and she would do half, and we would do some things together. And it worked. We had the same cadence, and we had the same work ethic. You know, two little women immigrants to this country were very much the immigrants get the job done kind of thing.
Before investigating QAnon and that movement, what was your work generally been dedicated to? And Sophia, as you said, is like a very respected expert on extremism, and same thing with her. I mean, like this is pretty new, this theory. There are obviously, it's based on a lot of remnants. No conspiracy theory seems to necessarily be completely original. You write a lot about the inspirations from the elders of the Protocols of Zion and all of that, and so that all matters. But what were you kind of looking at before QAnon came up?
So for over 3 decades, I've been working on terrorism. I was one of the earliest, quote unquote, terrorism experts because I started before 9/11. And before 9/11, there was maybe about a dozen of us. And after 9/11, there were a lot more. But I had written, by the time I was writing this book, I'd written 5 books on terrorism. And every different manifestation of terrorism. And then I had branched out to looking at countering terrorism, especially when we saw all these people leaving and going to ISIS. And so I would consult with governments around the world and security agencies, here the FBI and CIA, but in the UK, MI5, MI6. And so the idea was that I was taking my expertise of understanding how terrorist groups recruit and then sort of superimposing that on QAnon. And then Sophia also, she's an expert on radicalization. And she's fighting a little bit this hypothetical situation, which we want to bring the temperature down. Like, I know that we're trying to sell books, but we don't agree with this whole new theme that QAnon is the new ISIS, because if we have 30 million ISIS people in this country, we're screwed. We're in big, big trouble. So I think that part of what she wanted to do was also say, this isn't a radicalization problem, it's a mental health problem. And so, you know, I would prefer that the two of us, and we're on the same page about this, that we have our credibility and that we believe in what we're saying. And that's going to be more important than selling a few extra books by causing panic and fear in the audience.
Well, I understand that, but reading the book and your work, I don't know if I want to use the words panic and fear, but certainly have a lot of concern, and I know that you do as well. So I'm not quite sure what you're saying, that you're playing down the threat that is QAnon or that it is not ISIS, because there are certainly a lot of parallels and comparisons. And why can't it also be both mental health and radicalization? I just asked you 14 questions. I don't know which one you want to pick to answer. Sorry.
No, so I'll go through it. So there are certain similarities. So, for example, some of the recruitment tools that QAnon uses, especially with women, are exactly the same as ISIS. I think part of what we were doing is at first you had people like Elizabeth Newman, who previously was in DHS and left, saying that it's the new ISIS. And then you had everyone saying, you know, QAnon are radicalizing people. And even the FBI came out and went from saying that it had potential to terrorism to saying that QAnon believers were going to be so disappointed by the fact that the prophecies weren't coming true that they could turn to violence. And part of what I wanted to nuance that a little bit, it's not everyone who believes in QAnon is a future terrorist. I think that there are degrees of QAnon belief that Sophia talks about in the book, and that depending on if you're a hybrid, if you're KKK and QAnon or an Oath Keeper and QAnon, the Oath Keeper and KKK part is really dangerous already. Right. QAnon is just an added,
Right. So we talk about, I've heard this phrase over and over. I don't know if you use it, but like terrorist sympathizers. And so I'm not ISIS. I would never go join ISIS. I definitely don't want my son to go join ISIS, but I support what ISIS is doing. I mean, you could say the same thing about, I don't know, you could say the same thing about an American and Navy SEALs. Well, I would never want to be a Navy SEAL, but I'm glad somebody is doing that dangerous work. So when it comes to QAnon, there's so many different gradations, and you guys have so much data that you reply on, because it's a scholarly book written for someone like me who's not a scholar. And I appreciate that a lot. But what does the data say about, you know, what people think? Because there's gradations and then there's categories of people. You write a lot about women and the attraction to QAnon for women. So is it I'm a full QAnon person and I'm going to go to the insurrection? There are a lot of women there, as you write. Or it's, hey, I'm home at TV watching and maybe I'll send a couple bucks or something.
So it's a combination. So it's exactly like when YouGov in the UK did a poll and they found that 5% of Muslims agreed with the statement about jihad, and people started doing the calculation and they were like, that's hundreds of thousands of people. That's very, very concerning. And so we have it at around, it's up to about 16% of the American public believe some element of QAnon, that there is a global cabal that is controlling things like the puppet master, and that things are not just happening by accident, that it's, it's not a coincidence. Even Lauren Boebert this last weekend said it wasn't a coincidence that July 4th fell on a Sunday. Actually, it's exactly a coincidence. It's exactly a coincidence. But so part of it is,
did she just say that?
She did actually say that, and I laughed because I think David Frum wrote back and said, absolutely, it was a coincidence. It just fell on a Sunday. But we know that Boebert...
It will fall on a Sunday, and how many years is it again? 7, I guess? It's I don't know how calendars work, but it will again fall on a Sunday.
It will again fall on a Sunday.
You can predict if you know how to do it. Yeah.
Well, that's why it was important she got her GED. So basically, for a lot of people in QAnon, it's part of it is sending money, and of course, following the money is where you find out who's benefiting from this baseless conspiracy. But I think a lot of it is sharing stuff on Facebook and convincing family members, because what happens psychologically is the moment that you figure out what's going on, you feel like it's a personal obligation to tell everyone in your life, this is what's going on. And so in that way, again, there is, the general obligation and the personal obligation to engage in jihad. There is some similarities with that. But I did want to make it clear that I don't think the women holding signs in Anaheim are going on jihad anytime soon. So let's make the distinction. If QAnon is infiltrating the military because General Flynn made his pledge to QAnon last July 4th, that's dangerous, because people who've been trained in the U.S. military have the potential to be dangerous. That's what we trained them to do. Yeah. But that's where I wanted to caveat. Like, you have to sort of be a hybrid, QAnon and something else.
Yeah, but I guess what I see, and maybe I'm more, concerned or whatever on the spectrum than you are. You would know better than I am. But I mean, you talk about this, that I see people voting for actual representatives that are QAnon supporters, voting for them. And when those people are in power, then they can, do horrible things, and they can prevent, obviously, really good things from happening based on wild conspiracies. And so they can stop the levers of power from moving to do good things for people, local, state, and federal governments, and they can use the levers of power as well. And we've seen the damage that it has already done, I would argue. I mean, there's these conspiracies often do turn into actual violence at synagogues in America, the pizza shop in D.C., and most importantly, the insurrection, where there's a huge amount of folks there. You wrote a whole chapter about that. So let's talk about the actual activation of and when they do become violent and actually act on their beliefs. I mean, the looks on their faces, the things. I'm obsessed with those videos, Dr. Blum. I'm like, I watch them over and over. I'm like, these people, I don't have any of them in my life to ask. I'd like to have some of them on the show to quiz them and get to know them. But sorry, I'm rambling. What is the danger that it poses when it comes to the insurrection and future similar types of violent terrorist attacks?
So the biggest danger that QAnon poses is that it undermines our democratic institutions. It makes people disbelieve in media, disbelieve in the process of voting. And like the whole ethos of this country is built on an idea. We're not a country of an ethnic. We're a country of an idea. The lofty goals, the city on the hill. And so when you have all these different people who are believing crazy things, then what ends up happening is they are going to vote for QAnon candidates. Those QAnon candidates may have influences in school boards. My worry with the 30 million is that if they're homeschooling their kids and they're teaching their kids about this global cabal, these kids are going to grow up in an environment, and they're like, it's the next generation that would really worry me, because they can be activated like this. But this is where, and the reason I say this is because we made some mistakes after 9/11.
That's an understatement.
We overcompensated
That's for sure.
for having like Bush having ignored the presidential daily briefing saying bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden. We went way too over to the other side. And so I have a colleague at Ohio State, John Mueller, no relation. And so John writes that most people had a better chance of being hit by lightning twice than being killed by a terrorist.
Yep.
But the way Fox News and even CNN and MSNBC, the way we talked about terrorism, people felt that they could be killed by a terrorist at any time.
I always said in relation to that point, if you're more worried about a terrorist attack than a heart attack, you've been duped.
Yeah. So it was part of it is, we've had people at this high level of psychological arousal, not the sexual kind, not the good one, but we've had these people at this level of arousal where the tiniest thing could set them off. So, for example, before the pandemic, about 2.5 years ago, a taxi driver fell asleep at the wheel at LaGuardia, and the car started moving, and it accidentally jumped the curb. And everyone, oh my God, it's terrorism. Yep. No, the guy just fell asleep at the wheel. Yep. I mean, we defaulted that something was always terrorism, and then you had to crawl it back instead of saying, oh, what is this thing? Oh, it's actually terrorism. And so this is why, when you have people who've been studying terrorism for a really long time, and although I do want to sell books, I find it's more important for me to be honest with people about the likelihood of terrorism, that if we bring down, the conversation and we lower the temperature, we're going to be in a better situation to make good decisions. When everyone is, can easily be set off by the smallest thing, that's when we make bad decisions.
So I'm far more worried about QAnon than I ever was Al-Qaeda. And I was in New York and lost friends that day. And yeah, it's here and it's spreading. And it's being led by the most serious people. Donald Trump, and I argue, he was asked about QAnon several times, and one of which you write about this. He was like, "Listen, I heard they're against the pedophiles. I'm for that." And I was like, "I can't believe
is that such a bad thing?"
Yeah, I can't believe he got out of that. I can't believe that moment, whatever that journalist was, that he got out of that. Necessarily, but he always is good at somehow getting out of it. The insurrection. Let's talk about that. I mean, you write a chapter about it. How does that fit in your book?
So Sophia, beyond the chapter that we wrote in the book, Sophia also recently published an article about the zip tie guys. These are the Oath Keepers. These are the guys with paramilitary training. So I think what you had a bunch of really bad actors. And then the QAnon supporters with the shirts and everything, they filled out the crowd so that there was a lot more people. But the most dangerous people in the crowd would have been, again, either hybrid, or they would have been 3%ers or neo-Nazis or Patriot Front, like those guys that were marching in Philadelphia and Washington.
I saw that over the weekend.
This last weekend. So I think it's important that we understand that what QAnon has done is it has created this, singularity. That's Anna Merlin says that in The Atlantic. It's like a conspiracy singularity that it has pulled in as a black hole all of the adjacent conspiracies, but it's also been able to create a fertile ground for these militias, for racist right-wingers, for all these different groups that are anti-government. And now they can find a welcome home underneath the Q umbrella.
The Q umbrella has attracted a lot of different types of people, but there are some common threads and categories. Obviously the title of your book suggests some of these to some extent. Pastels and Pedophiles Inside the Mind of QAnon, of course, is the title of the book. Dr. Bloom, I told you just before, and like I said, I didn't want to belabor it too much. I hate talking about it. It's so traumatizing to me, but about what happened to me and about 5 million people calling me a pedophile for 4 days. And what the catalyst for that was. It was wild. It's the worst thing you can call a person. What is this obsession with pedophilia, which is a thing? It is terrible. Everybody knows someone or themselves has been abused. It is, in some places, an institution. I've railed against the Catholic Church for a long time about it. We're not dismissing it, but it seems like they see it everywhere. And it also seems like it's mostly liberal Democrats. That it's just a wild thing to accuse people of, and what are they so worried about, and why so many women?
Well, women, first of all, because the idea of hurting a child, is going to activate a woman's almost maternal instincts, because being protective of children is something that is natural both in men and women, but I think people think more so in women.
I've heard you say that a couple times. I just want to add to that. I think that you're not saying this, and I'm not sure if you're not saying it on purpose or not, but when I heard you say that, I was kind of like, well, men care about kids. I really worry about that. That kind of thing is reprehensible to me, and I would defend him. But then I was like, but wait, it's probably mostly men who are committing the type of sex crime, and women have for millennial been on the watch for these pedophiles that are mostly men. So is that also true, or I don't know the stats of who becomes?
There have been female pedophiles, but I think, some of the gender discussions, usually they're like teachers in Florida, that end up dating or marrying their students. Generally, when it's on the reverse side, there's a very strange reaction. Like if a young man is having sex with a much, much older woman, let's say he's 15 and she's 20, his friends are going to congratulate him. And it doesn't have the same stigma.
But if a man is assaulted by another man, if a young man's assaulted by an older man, that you don't tell anybody about because of that stigma. Sorry, I finished your sentence.
There's a different stigma, and there have been problems not just in the Catholic Church. I work with people whose focus is child protection, and I've written about how, for example, in Pashtunwali culture in Afghanistan and Pakistan, they have this thing where they rape little boys. They dress the boys up as girls. They go, the boys dance for them. It's called bachabazi. So we see it in every religion. There have been Orthodox rabbis who've been accused, and we know about the Catholic Church. So it's not the purview of just one religion, but it does have that instant reaction that, that is the worst thing you can call someone is a pedophile. And it's the reason why they always call Joe Biden a pedophile. And they'll show pictures of him like loving his grandchildren, hugging them or giving them a kiss as evidence. Like, oh my God, this grandparent loves his own grandchild.
I always attribute that to being almost 80. I'm like, I don't know, that's how 80-year-old Irishmen have been. It's now probably less appropriate, but now he seemingly knows to be more careful about that. But when Joe Biden met my daughter when she was 12, he kissed her on the head, and she loved it. She thought it was the greatest thing in the world. He did not love that my wife stalked him into a clothing store to meet him, but he didn't mind meeting my daughter.
And they actually, they'll try to make it sound like it's something gross and disgusting. So they'll have images that they'll disseminate on their propaganda channels of gay pride, where you've got, two dads, and the two dads love their child. They're kissing the child. And they're like, oh, you see, they're all pedophiles. It's crazy.
Well, what about the, we talked a little bit about the gender component, but what about the religious component? It seems, again, anecdotally, you've got data here. It seems that most QAnon people, I'm just making it up, but it does seem like most QAnon people are also overtly religious, specifically Christian, and they use all kinds of Christian imagery and tattoos and signs and Bible passages. It does seem like there's a huge overlap with the QAnon movement and religious Christians generally. I don't know if there's a lot of Jewish people, even secular Jews or religious Jews or Muslim people that are buying into this. What do we know about the religious overlaps?
So we're very fortunate that American Enterprises Institute, which is a conservative think tank, did some data collection. And evangelicals are the largest religious bloc that believes in QAnon. And we're starting to see certain evangelical preachers who are citing and quoting QAnon and calling people pedophiles and talking about the blood drinking cabal. But, and this is the part that was really, kind of surprising. I speak a few languages and I do my research in different languages. And so I've been on some of the Hebrew language QAnon channels, and QAnon has become really popular.
As a guest?
No, just watching them, watching and reporting. But I did an analysis it came out in Haaretz on Sunday, that it's an anti-Semitic baseless conspiracy that is attracting Orthodox Jews and Israelis. And so I'm going through the stuff in Hebrew. Now, the other thing we're doing, because Sophia also speaks Russian, we're looking at what's going on in the Russian QAnon channels. And as part of our team, the world's best expert on jihad, Nelly Lahoud, is looking at it in Arabic. And interestingly enough, we think that the Muslims are a little bit inoculated from QAnon, partly because you don't talk about pedophilia. It's something that is just not discussed. But also, they're pretty strict about false prophets. Remember, Muhammad's the seal of the prophet. No other prophet comes after Muhammad. So this idea of QAnon being elevated to a deity-like status would sort of, maybe it would rub Muslims the wrong way. We are seeing some of it in Egypt and in Iraq, and so we're looking at Arabic QAnon. Are they talking about pizza? Because they do like those conspiracies in Arabic.
Well, people like them everywhere. It would seem every culture, religious or not, there are people who buy into it. But you make a great case for why Muslims would be inoculated on it. But then I'm still stuck on the fact that there are Jews that believe and follow a conspiracy theory that is so blatantly anti-Semitic.
And they got mad at me because the article went live on Sunday, and Haaretz is like, the New York Times or the Washington Post of Israel. So it got some traction, and I started getting, Jewish people really angry with me. There's nothing anti-Semitic in QAnon, and I was just like, Alilat Dam, I can quote from it. Now, some of the stuff is toned down a little bit, but they're still pointing to various Israeli celebrities in addition to, the usual Ellen DeGeneres and Chrissy Teigen and Tom Hanks and Oprah. They have a specific group of celebrities that every country, that as QAnon changes and it's in a different language, it has a slightly different flavor to appeal to the local crowd. It's like when you used to go to, let's say, the Comedy Cellar in Cleveland, you're going to tell a Cleveland joke, for the local, just to warm them up a little bit.
I thank you for bringing it into my wheelhouse. Yes, absolutely. It builds trust and familiarity, and that's
mirroring.
And what?
We call it, in psychology, they call it mirroring, so that if you make a gesture, I'll make a gesture, and so you feel like he really understands me. I can relate.
Yeah, it works every time. At least with comedy and with propaganda, for sure. What about the racial component, which you also write about? I know a lot of black people believe some crazy shit, and some of the really smart friends of mine who also happen to be black believe in a couple. Sometimes every once in a while, it's just hilarious. We're talking about a buddy of mine, and he'll say something bizarre. I'm like, what are you talking? That's not. But yet, I don't know any of them that buy into, again, this is an anecdote, I'm talking about black folks I know and read, don't know, but read and follow, that really are too bought into it. I know there are some, but it doesn't seem to have really infiltrated, the black community to create supporters for these theories very much, but I could be wrong. What is the deal?
And when you look at so there were about 15 primary candidates last summer in California that were running on the QAnon. So we have 97 across the country. Florida, Texas, and California had those were the three states that had the most candidates that believed in QAnon. And when you look at the California candidates, you actually do see some diversity. It's more diverse than most QAnon believers, but we're seeing it spread in Latina communities. Someone got mad at me because I said Latinx last night.
Oh yeah, I've gotten that. I've heard that. I'm
happy to say Latin, Latino, Latina, whatever you want to say. Yep. But in those communities, we saw it's spreading in Venezuela and in Mexico. And so as it's creeping through the rest of the world, and it's also in parts of Africa now, we have to be really, really careful because, First of all, evangelicals are also a proselytizing religion like Mormons in some ways. And so if you have evangelicals at 30 to 35% that believe in QAnon, when they go out and they start, bringing the word of Jesus to what they consider to be pagans, they're going to bring the word of Q as well. So we have to be really careful that it's filtering into different religious traditions. And so it's not just, it's anti-Catholic and it's attracting some Catholics. Yeah. It's anti-Jewish, attracting Orthodox Jews, and it's I think it's anti-Christian. Like, I think it's so wrong and so awful on so many levels, but you have pastors in evangelical churches that are afraid to say anything against it because they're going to lose their parishioners.
Well, I feel like the most consequential development, and I'm not done with your book, and I'm not sure if you covered this because I don't know exactly when you published, but is the vaccines. I mean, it is convincing people that these miracle drugs that have been developed in record speed that are saving lives, and 99% of people that are now dying of COVID are not vaccinated. I mean, the statistics are so overwhelming, and anybody who studies, the history of vaccines knows that they are, like, next to clean drinking water, the most important development and science for humans, and they're dying. People are dying because they're not getting these vaccines, or they're spreading. I mean, how much of an overlap is that? How concerned are you that that's a huge catalyst of the type of thinking that we see with the anti-vax movement?
It's huge right now. Like, all of the QAnon channels, there are some that are, like, Ghost Ezra has hundreds of thousands of followers. I mean, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people that are consuming this material. And so it's all about the pedophile cabal, but then it's also anti-vax. And it's crazily anti-vax to the extent that if anyone gets vaccinated and then dies, and they could have died from a heart attack, or they could have died from, a blood clot, they could have died from anything. Yep. But what they'll do is they'll show a picture of their tweet that they got vaccinated, and then they'll show the picture from the newspaper that they're dead. And so every time they mention a name, I will go and say, okay, does this person really exist? This 30-year-old person that died? Yeah, they died. And so now they're convincing people that, anyone who takes the vaccine, you could die, or you could get these crazy blemishes all over your skin, or they'll say, this is what happened to the baby after the baby was vaccinated, and no one under 12 has been vaccinated. So the problem is people are living in this information bubble where they're not getting anything disconfirming, and so the people who believe in QAnon are shockingly anti-vax, despite the fact that you do have people like Mr. Graham, whose father, created the church, is saying... Oh, yeah,
leaders in the evangelical movement who are trying to tell their followers and supporters to get vaccinated are not necessarily gaining a lot of ground by...
They're not gaining ground because there's so much anti-vaccine. And also, it was very much in Brooklyn, in the Jewish community, in the Orthodox community, I guess... There are certain areas of Brooklyn that are, more Orthodox than others, that no one was taking the vaccine. And then a pregnant woman died of COVID-19. And so all of a sudden they started, okay, we'll take it now. Because the fact that you lost a woman and the baby, the problem is that they are convinced that the vaccine is microchipping you. And they will have these very high production value videos to convince you that these microchips, and so that, Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci, they're going to follow you.
Yeah, it's frustrating because you can't, sometimes two conspiracy theories don't add up. They can't both be true about, the virus was leaked by the Chinese and it's being microchipped. I mean, that you can't, but I digress. I mean, getting back to what can be done. You have a chapter, Life After Q, and I've talked with the cult expert Stephen Hassan many times. He's really great, and I feel like there's no one answer. But for people who get out of this conspiracy track or any other, what can we do for our friends and family members? Because a lot of the things that you think would be obvious are not, and solutions can be counterintuitive. And finally, they don't, every person is different, is on a different journey. And so there's no one answer, I suppose.
I mean, Sophia basically took the lead to explain different levels of Q, and that with the fact that none of these prophecies have come true, people are very disappointed. And there's a concern that they might hurt themselves because they actually live in a world where they think that, before Joe Biden was elected, that if Joe Biden became president, it was going to be the purge. Like those movies, those crazy horror movies that everyone's killing everyone else. They don't actually believe Joe Biden is president. Some of them believe that that's actually Donald Trump and he's wearing a Joe Biden mask.
Yeah, I've heard that.
120 pounds went, but that's
but I mean, on that one, to me, that is celebrity drinking baby's blood is crazy. It's really, 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 really wild that an educated person even could believe that. But this one, that this is Joe Biden is Donald Trump. Like, can you have? Isn't there a mental illness there? Isn't there some kind of impairment there to believe that? That can't be a widely held belief.
It's in different corners, because in one of the beliefs is that on day one, Joe Biden signed 17 executive orders. Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. And so maybe Joe Biden is in on it and he's there to help. Like, he's not a black hat, he's a white hat. Other times you're hearing people say that Joe Biden himself is a pedophile and he's drinking the blood. And I mean, so part of it is that, as you said, one of the primary ways we understand that something is a conspiracy is that it's not internally consistent, that you can't have all of these things happen at the same time and still be logical. So there's part of that. But I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is that QAnon is splitting apart families. And we know that, if you have some crazy truther uncle who says, that, President Obama wasn't born in this country and 9/11 was perpetrated by the CIA. And, he has all these crazy ideas. Chances are you're going to stop inviting him over for Thanksgiving. And what we were trying to say is that the people who are in QAnon are suffering, and they were suffering. That's why they were vulnerable in the first place. And now they're living in this information bubble that they're also suffering from. So that instead of shunning them and saying, I'm unfriending you on Facebook and I'm cutting you off, instead of doing that, Sophia was saying, no, here's a different approach. Embrace them. Takes a village. It's all of our responsibilities to help people get out of this conspiracy theory and back into the light. And because if you just want to argue with them, they're going to double and triple down.
Right.
And that's why we said it's a very gentle and slow approach.
But I don't know that I just, I'll talk to Sophia maybe another time about this, but I don't know what that means to embrace them and I want to be compassionate. I want to have them over our home. I want to be with them. But if that shit comes up, I'm arguing. I'm going to argue. I don't know what to do. I can't ignore it. I can't be like, Joe Biden's a pedophile, drinks baby's blood. Oh, that's nice. Do you want some more? Do you want another hot dog?
Well, so what Sophia was saying in the book is ask questions. And that's why she did something really clever. At the back, she has this FAQ section.
Yeah, I like it.
Also, it has the, letter Q. So, on that. But,
I know, I'm so suspicious now. Every time I see the letter Q, there's a new real estate company. It's just Q. And I'm like, they got to be capitalizing on it. Like, every time I see the word Q, I'm like, oh, there it is. I'm becoming one.
There's a Chinese restaurant in Boston on State Street called Q, and now I'm thinking, oh my God.
It's such a great letter.
I can't even imagine. It's called selective retention, by the way, in psychology, because twice a day your alarm clock says 9/11. But if you happen to look at your either the microwave or your VCR or your alarm clock at 11 minutes past 9 a.m. or p.m., the first thing you're going to think about is 9/11. But it happens twice a day, every day. So what's happened now, we were going to have this selective retention, and every time we see the word Q, you're going to wonder, is this a front for the conspiracy?
There's a bar in Aspen called ISIS.
Well, you see,
it survived. It survived the whole ISIS movement.
It did, because a lot of companies named ISIS and women named ISIS. They changed their name. Companies went bankrupt. There was a cosmetics company in the UK. They had to close down. There was a great show in the 70s. I'm aging myself by letting you know about this amazing show in the 70s, but it was about I think an archaeology teacher that could garner the powers of ISIS, and then she was a superhero.
Oh my gosh!
At the same time as Wonder Woman in the 70s.
Yeah, that's just bad luck. So, but we're talking about the FAQ section that Sophia mentioned. Was there anything else on that?
What you can do is start asking questions. If someone in your life believes in QAnon, and you can say, okay, tell me more about X or Y. And at a certain point, you're going to get to a level where they're not going to be able to answer it. Instead of saying, oh, you're wrong, because if you just say you're wrong and you're crazy, they're going to double and triple down. Because that's our normal, defense mechanisms that we talk about. But Sophia, we hadn't read this book, but I'm gonna recommend another book, which is very unusual for someone on a book tour. But Mick West has a book called Escaping the Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah,
and we wrote the book. I hadn't seen his book beforehand, and so now, with Sophia's recommendations and what Mick West is saying, I think together, he talks about getting to the point where someone stops believing so much in the conspiracy theory, and then that's the point you start at. You sort of feel out where their boundaries are, and that's where you can begin to get them out.
Yeah, now I remember where I heard him. He is a guy who is got a lot of respect on taking a look at pretty much every viable theory on UFOs, UFAs, I think they're now called, and looking at all of them. That's him, right?
It's him, and he also talked about contrails and chemtrails, and he explains all this. And so, some people, because like conspiracy theories are like chips, you can't just have one.
Yeah.
Most people believe in more than one.
Right, yes, that's very true, yeah.
So that, let's say, they believe in QAnon, but they don't believe in lizard people. Well, start from lizard people and start, pushing back.
Yeah. I love talking to you, and I really am enjoying this book and would love to talk with you more about all of your work in the future. And when I get done with it, hopefully you can come back, joined by Sophia, and we'll just keep talking about it because it's such important work and it's ongoing. Dr. Mia Bloom, Georgia State University. Get the book, everybody. It's all the links in the show notes. Thank you very much, Dr. Bloom, for joining me. Really fascinating and important work.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okie doke. There you go, Dr. Mia Bloom. Get that book. Very interesting. Pastels and pedophiles inside the mind of QAnon. She's on Twitter, by the way, at Mia M. Bloom. Please give her a follow there and let her know that you heard her here on Stand Up. If you haven't already signed up for a paid subscription, what are you waiting for? Support this independent media show where we all learn together. We're on this journey together, supporting each other on it as well. And you can do that in person or at least virtually at the Hangout on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Also, I'll be with Jay Alco Van at City Winery in Boston on July 26th. Get tickets for that. There should be a link in the show notes for it. And thank you very much for listening today. I appreciated all of your support and your friendship. And I love you guys. So thank you very much for being a part of this community and supporting this podcast. And now it's time for me to say goodbye and have the great John Carroll sing us out with a song he wrote just for us called You Gotta Stand Up. Apparently I don't even know the song, even though I open and close with it every day. Go buy it right now. Go support John. And thank you very much for listening. Here we go.
Sunlight, you gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yeah. stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run